And I think for the Israelis, they made it very clear for them that was it. I mean, they couldn't wait till the 99-yard line
Yeah.
and risk that Khamenei would cross the goal on a warhead, because by the time he crossed the goal on a warhead, it'd be too late. So the Israelis, especially after October 7th, their entire kind of military and security doctrine fundamentally changed, which was, we're not going to wait for gathering threats and then get surprised and end up in the tragedy of October 7th. We're going to escalate to de-escalate. So we're not going to wait for Hezbollah to launch, thousands of missiles at Tel Aviv, and which was very much Khamenei's deterrence against a U.S. and Israeli strike. All the while, he had believed that Israel would not strike his nuclear facilities because he had assembled this massive terror army in Lebanon, and Hezbollah had 100, 200,000 missiles and rockets that could absolutely destroy central Israel and kill tens of thousands of Israeli civilians, and the Israelis would never dare strike with Hezbollah. But what happened after October 7th is Hezbollah starts firing on Israel, and the Israelis say, that's it, we're done. We've been living with this terror threat in our borders for decades. And they escalated to de-escalate. They went right after Hezbollah, took out the entire senior leadership of Hezbollah, took out 50 to 70% of their missiles and rockets, and really decimated Hezbollah's capabilities. Once they removed Hezbollah as this threat, right, Hamas had been decimated. They still had the Houthis, the Shiite militias in Iraq to contend with, but they really had gotten rid of the most severe threat to the Israeli homeland. And that, in combination with the signals that Iran was moving towards completing a nuclear warhead, that was the predicate for the Israelis to say, we're striking. We cannot allow Iran to develop nuclear weapons when Iranian-backed militias are threatening more and more October 7th. And if Iran has a nuclear weapon and they're threatening to introduce tactical nukes into the battlefield the way Putin did in Ukraine, or threatened to do in Ukraine, that would severely constrain the ability of the IDF to respond to the next October 7th, because Khamenei would threaten nuclear escalation, and an American president would tell an Israeli prime minister to tell the IDF chief of staff, stand down, you're not responding to the next October 7th because we're going to risk nuclear war.
How do you think it'll change things between the U.S. and Iran now that, and again, to my knowledge, I'm sure there has been covert action, but the bombing, direct military action in Iran, which just seems to be a line crossed in the sand, probably pros and cons to that. But that decision, and I have no doubt that we were supporting Israel, whether it's through equipment, intelligence, all of those things, but the direct involvement of the U.S. military in the limited tactical strike, how do you think that'll change things going forward?
Well, it's interesting to put in a bit of historical context. The Islamic Republic has been at war with us for decades. They've killed and maimed thousands of Americans, Andy, as you know, right, including men and women who were in Iraq and Afghanistan.
One of my best friends was killed by an Iranian EFP, an explosive penetrator. It was an IED in Iraq.
Exactly. And that was Qasem Soleimani, right? That was Qasem Soleimani was the one, again, the Quds Force commander that Trump took out in 2020. He was the one who armed the Iraqi Shiite militias and other terror organizations with the EFPs that killed your friend. And they also killed and maimed, I think it was over 600, 700, 800 Americans in Iraq, as I recall, but also thousands over the years. I mean, our Marines in Lebanon in '83, our diplomats, they worked and trained Al-Qaeda very closely, as the U.S. intelligence community revealed when they declassified thousands of pages of intelligence showing the cooperation between Al-Qaeda and Hezbollah, which was the Iranian trained terrorist organization I referenced earlier, and the kidnappings and the hostage takings. It's a litany of Iranian attacks against America. Now, the only time that America responded militarily against Iran was during the Reagan administration, when Iran tried to shut down international shipping in the Straits of Hormuz, and were harassing ships, and then actually did damage, as I recall, to a U.S. Navy ship. And Reagan ordered the U.S. Navy to go after the Iranian Navy, sunk a number of Iranian battleships, and the Iranians backed up because they understood that U.S. military intervention could mean the end of their regime. In fact, as it's an interesting just side note of the history, during the Reagan administration, the United States accidentally shot down an Iranian passenger airline.
Yeah.
And the United States apologized and offered compensation. But the Iranians at the time didn't believe this was accidental. And it's interesting because it's going to come back to the modern history here. Ali Khamenei, who is the current supreme leader, okay, at the time, he and a former president, Rafsanjani, went to the then supreme leader, Khomeini, and said, boss, we have to end the Iran-Iraq war after 8 brutal years because the United States is intervening on behalf of the Iraqis. We can fight the Iraqis for another 10 years. We cannot fight the Americans. And Khomeini, the supreme leader at the time, said, after much anguished deliberation, said, I will drink the poison chalice, and make the decision for a ceasefire with the Iraqis because he didn't want to confront the Americans. Now, with the exception of an accidental downing of a passenger airline perceived as military intervention wrongly, and actual military intervention by the Reagan administration, we had been at war with the Iranians, except they were at war with us, and we were doing nothing against them for all these decades, despite all these American casualties. And then President Trump decides, I'm going to use narrow, selective, deadly force in one mission, and that is to finish the job the Israelis had started and had accomplished quite significantly. And I'm going to take out the Fordo facility with B-2 bombers and severely degrade what is left of Iran's nuclear infrastructure. Now, how is that going to change things? Well, I think it'll be interesting if Khamenei today, the supreme leader, if he drinks the poison chalice that his boss drank all those years ago and decides that American military intervention is a risk not just to his nuclear program, but to his regime, and that he better send his negotiators back to Oman for a 6th round of negotiations and try to do a deal with the Americans on his nuclear program. If he perceives that President Trump is serious about the threat of military force and the use of military force again, he's now seen a very deadly demonstration of American military power, then maybe he does a deal and we can peacefully resolve this. On the other hand, if he thinks that his pride can't handle this and there's no deal that he wants to do with the hated Americans, will he look to escalate against us, go after our military bases in the Middle East, use sleeper cells for terrorist attacks against Americans abroad or on the American homeland, go after our allies in the Gulf, and really continue to ratchet up the escalation, believing that Trump won't respond again. Trump won't let the Israelis respond, and he'll be able to restore his nuclear and military and security capabilities with Chinese and Russian help and build back all of the facilities, personnel, and capabilities that have been so decimated during the past, really just during the past year and a half by Israeli and then U.S. military activity.
If you were in Vegas and you had to bet on one of those two options, we're at the roulette wheel, even though I know there's green on the 00, which would you go with?
I mean, I know what the Iranians should do.
That's no guarantee.
I know what Khamenei. I mean, Khamenei's smart play is to go to the negotiating table, do a deal with Trump, knowing it's a 3-year deal because then Trump is gone, and then you bet on the next Republican and Democratic president not being willing to use American military power, someone who will constrain the use of Israeli power, and then Khamenei can rebuild these capabilities under the next president, and he can go for a nuclear weapon, not being afraid of an American or Israeli response. That's what I would do if I were him. I'd go to the table, do a 3-year deal, and then boom, escalate in 3.5 years' time when Trump is gone. Is he smart enough to do that? He's smart, and he's a wily operator. He's the longest serving leader in the world. He's been in power since 1989. He has survived, the internal Persian Game of Thrones, and he certainly run circles around many American presidents. Now he's run into the wall of Donald Trump, and I think he doesn't know quite where Trump was going. He badly miscalculated. He thought Trump was not going to use American military power. He and his associates were listening to our internal political debate, and they thought that the isolationist wing of the Republican Party was very powerful, and that they would constrain and persuade Trump, and that Trump would not use American military power, and that he would not allow the Israelis to do what they did. So they've miscalculated once. I worry he's going to miscalculate again, and that he is going to try to escalate against us and really risk his regime.